kiss for you.
If you're looking for the too long didn't watch what this is, Google can't have any competitors because primarily they give you information very quickly, right? This weather alert is immediate, giving me all the information I need, and then I can leave. Bing does not do that. So it's the relay of information very quickly, and it's the fact that it has been ingrained into our society from a young age that Google is the primary and best option. It's used for everything from Chromebooks to web browsing to email to document and document creation to the organization of classrooms and all that. It's very prevalent there, and so that, combined with the speed of information, really gives you no other reason to choose anything else. If you want to watch the rest of the video, I talk about the case that brought this up. I talk about some design decisions that maybe make Bing or Google better or worse depending on your scenario. I talk about sort of some examples that I find useful, as well as that whole idea of being ingrained and kind of my experience with that. So if any of that sounds interesting, stick with the video, and I'll see everyone next week. In light of the recent news of the Google versus US lawsuit that happened recently, where the judge determined that Google was in fact a monopoly and practicing monopolistic practices by having the default search engine be Google on every single platform, as well as its monopoly and maintenance on the ad platform it uses for its search, I thought it would be an interesting video to kind of look at why can't anyone else in the space compete with Google. Now, this is actually a question my grandmother asked me when this antitrust case kind of got brought up. It was the fact that, okay, what makes Google specifically so special that all of a sudden they're a monopoly when before they, weren't considered a monopoly? And, I kind of explained it to her and all that, but what I really kind of failed to capture is just the amount of hold that Google had at the time and now. So I think the best way that I can sort of describe hold that Google has is kind of describing the lack of hold that the other platforms have. So, as of 2024, now this is after the Bing integration with ChatGPT and after Microsoft's push for Bing in other markets, Bing has a 7.85% market share in the US for search engines. That market share has obviously been up from 5.97 in 2021 before all the AI stuff happened. So, since the AI stuff has increased by about 2%, but not a ton, but still a decent amount. In contrast, Google has 91% of the market in general, and that's been pretty consistent throughout its entire life. That is obviously not a concern for many people, but when you're looking at the numbers and you're saying if it's a monopoly or not, 91% is a lot of percent, and Bing only having 5 to 7% is definitely a very low amount. And so the first question you have to ask yourself is, okay, does that in itself qualify monopoly? I wouldn't necessarily say having a 91% market share is a monopoly until you get into the practices that Google was accused of doing. The main thing that the judge in this suit determined was that Google breached Section 2 of the Sherman Act because they put the default for Firefox, for Apple Safari devices, for asking Siri or asking Google Assistant or Alexa, all those devices. They put Google Google Search as the default option. Instead of being like Bing or DuckDuckGo or Yahoo or any of that, it's all Google, all the time. Go to Firefox, it's Google. Go to Edge, right here, what I'm using, it's defaulting to Google, right? And so that, on top of the fact that their ad platform requires you to use Google in order to have the ad being shown, resulted in a very large antitrust case put against them that has now resulted in them saying and issuing a ruling that they do consider Google a monopoly and using those monopolistic practices. Those are actions not necessarily because Google has a 91% market share, but just because of those more recent actions. Now, in sort of discussing why there are no competitors, we talked about obviously market share, but that doesn't get into the actual mechanics about why. And I'll say this, when Google started to fall off, and when Bing started to increase in terms of market share because they added the AI stuff right into it, you saw that very big shift in access from Bing. And you can see it from this graph right here, right? You have in November 2022, starting off 2023, you have that start of the AI integration and ChatGPT integration into Bing. And you see a very large 12% increase in the year-over-year search traffic of Bing. You do not see the same thing with Google, and you can kind of see ever since the peak here in 2021, Google's kind of been going downhill, right? You have a steady 7% increase year over year. In 2021, it goes down to the negatives. right here, and then it kind of goes back up to about 0. It's hovering around 0 for a little bit, and now we're pretty consistently for about, 2 years here in the negatives. It's going down. People aren't using Google as much. They're not using Google search as much, and generally Google products, and relying on it, and they're starting to see a very larger increase, as we can see here for Bing. And that's kind of important to understand that, like, yes, while Google has a very large monopoly in terms of the amount of users, it does not have that continued growth you would see of a potential monopoly. You are not getting continuous growth over and over where your competitors can't. Now, that's not a defense of Google or anything, that's just kind of laying out the way the data is right now, right? Google is losing year over year traffic, and Bing is increasing in traffic. The reason that's important is because Bing is the second highest search engine, obviously, or technically speaking, it's YouTube, but because YouTube's superior to Google, we're kind of washing that and saying the second search engine is Bing. But that's why, we're talking about the numbers here, is because that AI thing that Bing had was very important. It was this kind of stone that let Bing get into this higher up position, that all of a sudden people were paying attention to it, downloading it, getting beta access for it, trying it out, just because of this AI feature. That's where you see that increase in. So what I wanted to kind of do, because I talked about this in the video where I compared the AI engines and all that, and tried to use Bing for a little bit there. When you try and get people on a new platform, the first thing you're going to want to do is make it like the old platform. And you can actually see that here. I'm currently on Edge, which is Microsoft's browser, and this is the default start page, right? I then went to Google and looked at its default start page. These pages are very similar. You have the Google page, it has the about and the store here. You have the main Google with the search bar. You have the Gmail, images, experiments, and all the other Google apps you could have here. And you have the stuff at the bottom. It's very similar, right? You have your, in this case, the selection of apps here are on the other side, right? On the left side, selection of Microsoft apps. You have the search bar in the middle. You have your logo in the middle. You have the kind of weather and other technical information on the right here. Same thing here, right? And you have the stuff at the bottom. Now, Microsoft on this default page puts all the crap that you don't want, like weather and watch and learning and shopping and all this. It puts it under the fold, which basically just means underneath where most people would see where your section of the screen is. So you have to scroll down in order to get all this crap, right? This list of tiles and things. And this is the case my feed. I don't use this, so it's not gonna have anything interesting. And if you click on one of these, it opens up a new tab, right, with this awful interface. And so that's kind of what you start, but it's out of the way, right? You're not gonna really see it. When you go to Bing site, because most people aren't gonna be using Edge, so they're not gonna have the default. Now, the first thing you're gonna notice about Bing is all the crap we didn't want here is front and center. It's not below the fold, it's right in front of your face. Immediately, to me, as someone that doesn't like all that in your face stuff, it immediately irritates me. It's immediately something I go towards. I'm like, wow, that doesn't look good. The other thing you'll notice, compared to even the default screen on here, is instead of having a nice, low, convenient showcase of all the other apps from Microsoft, they are plastered on the top here. You have Gmail and your images, they're right here. They're out of the way. On the Bing one, it's not out of the way, but it's not that useful, right? Because if I click on any one of these, it takes me to a completely different setup, a completely different site. And so that's a little bit annoying. The fact that this search bar is extra long for whatever reason to show you searches is also annoying, because if you compare it to Google, right, it's just one search bar and it highlights. And so I'm pointing out the fact that these things are going to be different, and when you're trying to get someone to move to a new platform, being different is not what you need. And so you can actually see that when we go to the start menu of this. This is very similar to Google. And so if you were to land here, it's not that different. Good that it's the same, because that means that it's an easier transition for people. If I see here and I type something, you'll have my recent searches, and they're all pretty normal. They're in purple and they're from the history. Same thing here, except what you'll notice is a little bit more stuff. This trending now section, a complete turnoff for new people. That could just be my experience and what I've seen, but what I tend to see is this to me, it feels like an ad, right? It's here's the trending stuff you don't care about that you didn't actually search, but we're gonna show it to you anyway just in case, right? This is kind of like the news section, except it's in the search bar. So immediately, instead of just typing in whatever, you have to type it and see all this crap you don't care about. It's another barrier. It's another thing that's like, oh, I wish it wasn't there, right? That's not a huge thing. It's just kind of the design choices here are very clear to attract a different kind of audience than something like Google is. And I think that's part of why Google has been successful. Google attracts at least when it started, attracts an audience that wants to get the information now. It's quick, it's effective, it's has ads, but it's not bogging you down with information. You click here, you type what you want, you hit enter, you're good, right? Very simple, very straightforward, very quick. The problem with Bing is it's literally the opposite. Again, targeting different markets, but I think that's why it didn't work as well. You have something that has a lot of information. It has news here, it has the stuff at the top here that's very annoying, it has this big bubble here, and it has this trending stuff that you don't care about. It's targeting an audience that might get distracted more easily, might be more interested in news. It's trying to play these games to increase engagement. Google never tries to do that, right? You're gonna go to Google and you're ready to hear and you're ready to look up, weather warning, for example. Oh, look, there's a thunderstorm going on right now. You're gonna get that very easily. If I were to type in that exact same thing onto Bing, let's see what Bing pops up. It doesn't pop up that warning. I go to Google, it immediately tells me there's a severe thunderstorm warning in the area. It tells me the affected area. It tells me recommended action. This is very useful because in the case of where I am right now, there's a thunderstorm. I need to know about it. And so it's going to tell me where it affects and all that. And then it gives me the websites. Bing doesn't do that. As you can see, I type it in, and the first thing I get is the AccuWeather post. That is the below one right here, right? The AccuWeather is the one below all the information I actually am looking for. The one for Bing doesn't do that. And so immediately, I'm like, okay, maybe I shouldn't be using Bing because if I want weather information, it's not going to give it to me. This may be because it's not using my location, but I've given it my location multiple times. It's not one of those factors. It's just not working. And that's just one of the things you realize with Bing is that it's not good at giving you that direct information. And something you realize once you've used both of them enough is that's really Google's strength, giving you the information very quickly. It might be targeting a different audience so that it doesn't need to do that, but to me, that doesn't really work, right? I'm a kind of person that's gonna want that information, and it's just not here. So I think that's an important factor not a lot of people really pay attention to, is the fact that Google's quick. Even when it's worse now and wrong and has a bunch of ad-filled crap, you're still getting the information quicker and more accurately and more like for you than something like Bing would. There are some things that Bing does better, and I'll highlight that now. When the AI thing happened with all the integration, one thing I was very impressed with was its ability to use the generative features to create things that actually work. For example, I typed in JavaScript code to check if a value for a phone number is in the correct format. This is basically just going to make a form in HTML to check if the phone number that I enter is in the correct format. If it's too low or not enough, then it's going to tell me, hey, enter a digit, right? It generates it. I can then put it into a tester right here. You can basically ignore all of this and just look at here. Same code, pops up. We're going to type in a number. As you can see, it doesn't have a problem. If I do one more, it's going to say, please enter a valid 10-digit number. And if I do too little, it's also going to say, enter a valid number. I can hit submit. It's not doing it at the moment because I disabled it. So this actually works, right? And so that's a really important thing of like, it can generate this code immediately. You can just copy it and it's going to work. You can also customize it by selecting the language, generating a test case and test data, performing a code review on it, adding error handling to make sure send a message if anything is a problem, make code compilable. This is probably, it's in like Python or some other language that needs a compiler, it's going to do that right. And so it ends up being a very useful tool for that because it's just immediate. If I type in that same thing into Google, I am not going to get the same result. It's going to give me the JavaScript for it. It's going to give me the functions that I would technically need with the same regex, which is basically like a pattern you can test with. So this exact pattern right here is used in this bottom one right here. So it's using the same kind of strategy to get there, even though it's using Gemini, but it doesn't give me all the HTML. It's just giving me the JavaScript. Now, for me, that wouldn't be a problem, but for other people that might not be familiar with HTML and having to make that and put it in, this isn't as useful. This does, give me the job. It does do what I ask, but it's not really useful in the context. You can't use this JavaScript here and create a web page. The Bing one understands that I'm probably going to want to put this into a web page and gives me the option to do that, because this is way I can actually see the result. It's really harder to see the result in just JavaScript. So for me, Bing wins this example, and it gives me options to change it. So right now, as you can see, we're pretty one-to-one. Bing was able to not get the weather that I wanted, Google was able to, but Bing was able to give me the correct, form that I was looking for of this code that I wanted generated, and Google was not. And I think that's pretty common for most people's understanding of how these different things work. There's going to be benefits and trade-offs. However, now we get to the actual lawsuit that happened in terms of why it ended up mattering. Regardless of your opinion on whether Google or Bing ends up being better for you because of the different use cases, one thing you cannot deny is the fact that it becomes very important to set these things off early. Now, when I was in school, and again, I'm not that old, so it's going to be, around 2014, 2015, all that. Before Chromebooks infected everything, we had iPads, and obviously iPads by default use Safari and sometimes use Firefox managed by the school. Those are not Chrome. Those are not Chrome-based browsers. Those are not Chrome. Those are not Google. And so because we used that, and then we used whatever, I think Edmodo was popular before Google Classroom got involved, and we used Word and all that, and like LibreOffice, right? We did not use Google products. We were not set up with Chromebooks. We didn't use Google, Docs or anything like that. Early on, it was Internet Explorer, LibreOffice, Word, and then when we got iPads, it was Firefox and Safari. The document taking things were like Edmodo for a classroom type deal. And so we used that, and that was a while, and then we eventually got Chromebooks and started using all Chrome stuff. But for a while it was iPads, and that's kind of how I grew up. And so I never really had that sort of instinctive need to use Google. However, nowadays that's very clearly not the case, and most things are Chromebooks. They're Chromebooks built on Chrome OS, using Chrome products, using web-based products all the time. Everything's Google everywhere. You sign up with the Google account, you log in with the Google account, use it for Google Classroom, Google Docs, Google Sheets, it's all of it. And so all of a sudden, no matter what's happening, you're using a Google product, if not multiple Google products, to get your school stuff done. It's a very big contrast between something that's just used for note-taking and you have a bunch of things to now everything being consolidated into one Google-focused option. That's also where the defaults come into play. Most people aren't going to switch their default from whatever it is set to. They're going to go with whatever it is, and in that case, it's going to be Google, and so that's what they're going to use. When you're not developed into that environment via things like Chromebooks and all that, you don't have that reliance, and so you can kind of flip-flop if you want. For most people growing up right now in schools, all they're seeing is Chromebooks, all they're seeing is Google. They don't even know Bing exists, they don't know DuckDuckGo exists, they don't know Escolab exists, Baidu, any of those. Yahoo. Most of the time, if you see Yahoo, their instinct is, oh, it's a finance thing, right? Because Yahoo Finance is like the only thing that Yahoo really does anymore in terms of what people like know it for, right? The Yahoo stuff, and they say, oh, it's an adult thing. It's not Google, it's not related to that. So that's just really a setup of like, okay, that's what everyone's thinking now. The default option is Google. They're growing up with Google products. They're growing up with Google Chrome and Google as a search engine and as a way of life, effectively, right? You gotta understand, for a lot of kids, this is their primary technology. They may have a phone or not. They're probably using Google. It's possible if they have like an iPhone that they're using Safari, and that's, I guess, a little bit different, but I would assume for a lot of the work being done, it's being done on a Chromebook. And so that's a very big difference from what it used to be, where you would be using Safari, Firefox, Edmodo, all these other different platforms that would be created to help students in school. You'd be using Yahoo, you'd be using Ask Jeeves, you'd be using Ask.com, you'd be using just a bunch of things. Now you're not. And because of this one sole focus, all of a sudden, everything's becoming condensed. It doesn't matter if Bing ultimately is a one-for-one in terms of what it can and can't do based on your preferences, because the people growing up now are never going to think about Bing because it's not even in their frame of reference. Nowadays, you're not going to say, hey, you should go do this thing with Bing. It's like not going to be a thing that they think about. For me, it's like, yeah, sure, I heard about Bing, it sucks, but I can give it another try. The people growing up with Chromebooks now, that's not even a thing that they think about. And you see that a lot with Apple too. Oh, there's not really another iPhone. I know Google makes an iPhone, and right, but like, or not an iPhone, a phone like the iPhone, and they just disregard it. It's a similar thing. In the school space, if it's Google, if it's not Google, it sucks. And so you end up with a factor of the reason people can't compete with Google, not only is it because they tend to give you info very quickly, but if, again, we go for like warning, what's the first thing that pops up with warning? Mass. It's gonna emergency alerts, the weather alerts, all this stuff, right? And it popped up once again. It had that like pop-up that was saying, "Hey, look, there's a weather problem." And you go the same thing with Bing, and it's like, "Nope, there's no weather problem. There's what's happening." It's not gonna tell you anything. It's literally going to give you the definition of what a weather alert is in UK weather, which is completely irrelevant to where I am located. This useless panel here, not even talking about anything related to what I'm doing, and some random UK weather I didn't even ask. And so, well, Google's benefit is the quick relay of information, and it's kind of infection, not necessarily in a bad way, but just overabundance and reliance for schools really makes it like the go-to. No one's going to think about Bing coming up because they're not trained on Bing, they're not used to Bing. And because of the historical speed of Google, no one that's older is going to say, oh, let's go back to Bing, right? Let's go back to these other search engines. And so you really just get a factor of that 91% market share. You're not going to go back to the other ones because new people aren't going to know about it, and old people are just going to assume it's the same as it's always been. That's kind of how these things work out. And so that, I think, is ultimately the reason no one can compete. It gets ingrained into society pretty early on, and the speed of Google makes it very hard to kind of get out of it. Real quick, I have a gaming channel that I'm trying to start up, Matt Gibbs Gaming. So hopefully those series are interesting to you. Right now, there's a video on multiverses, as I said before. Every time you see this, there hopefully will be another video added. So by the time you see this, my video on X Defiant should be up. Next time this plays, whatever video I have that's coming up will hopefully be out. So this is kind of a reminder that when you're seeing this, a new video will be on the channel live, so you can go check that out if you want. Subscribe over there if you like the content and gaming content. Subscribe over here if you like the tech content that I'm doing here. And yeah, have a nice day.